If you've ever driven through New Hampshire's White Mountains, odds are you've seen it, Mount Chocorua. Its jagged peak cutting into the skyline like a warning. But behind its beauty lurks a legend soaked in blood and vengeance. Was Chief Chocorua's dying curse real? And if so, who's still paying the price? Buckle up, gang. It's time to get weirder after dark. Welcome back to Weirder After Dark, the podcast where we get into all things New England weird. My name is Sean. I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Kathy.
And today, I have an episode for the two of you, and we've been doing a little bit about curses the last couple months.
All right.
We're going to dive into a new one here today. How you feeling about curses?
I like some curses. These are interesting.
I was going to say, I like curses, but that sounds weird.
No, you like cursing. I heard you talk. Yeah. But have you two ever put a curse on someone? Have you ever done that?
I have not, but I kind of wish I had that power.
Yeah?
No.
Yeah, me neither. But I say that we all three of us, we commit that by the end of the week, you put one curse on someone and see if it works.
All right, I'm in.
Is that too much, Chris? Chris, you jumped in way too fast. Yeah, fuck that, I'm in. Kathy was a little like, oh.
I feel like I kind of wish I had that power, but I feel like they would have to deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But hey, this episode is going to be coming out the week of April Fools. So if it doesn't work, April Fools! Like, just kidding. Yeah. Today's curse is about the curse of Mount Chocorua. Have you heard of the curse of Mount Chocorua at all?
I've heard of Mount Chocorua.
Okay.
I have not.
Okay. You haven't even heard of the mountain?
No.
Girl, come on.
No.
You're a New Englander your whole life.
I've never heard of it.
All right. Let's go ahead and let's just kick this off. If you've ever been to the New Hampshire White Mountains, the odds are that you've driven through Franconia Notch. And if you haven't, well, you're fucking missing out because it is gorgeous. And honestly, there's not much that beats the first time you see the morning sun hitting Cannon Cliff. The sheer wall of golden rock glowing in the sunrise is just chef's kiss. Or when you're just cruising up I-93 and suddenly you see those towering ridgelines of Mount Lincoln and Lafayette rise up in front of you. Like the combination of all those on the left and the right of 93 is just like so cool.
Yeah, if you've never been north of Manchester, guys, get out there.
Yeah.
It's a whole part of the state that's just amazing. That's why we live in New Hampshire.
I know my parents brought me when I was younger, but I was far too old when I did it, like the first cautious moments of my life where I can remember. I think I was like in my early 20s the first time. I was like, oh my, this has been in New Hampshire the whole time. And it's absolutely crazy. And then there's the presidential range, home to Mount Washington, the tallest peak in New England. But today, we're actually not talking about the presidentials and Mount Washington or Franconia Range with Lincoln and Lafayette. We're diving into one of New Hampshire's lesser known mountain ranges, one that actually holds one of the most photographed mountains in the world. The Sandwich Mountain Range. Which
you went from presidential to sandwich. I mean, it sounds like we're downgraded.
Yeah, we are not downgraded. We are. Yeah, a little bit. But they're still beautiful. This stretch, the Sandwich Mountain Range, sits north of the Lakes region, but south of the Kankamongus Highway and spans 30 miles from Campton to Conway. It is bordered on the west by the Pemigewasset River and to the east by the Saco River. And this range holds 12 notable peaks, many of which have deep indigenous roots tied to the Abenaki people. Some of those include Mount Passaconaway, Mount Wanalancet, Mount Kankamongus, and Mount Paugus. And then there's one that you've definitely, unless you're Kathy, heard of, Mount Chocorua, which we commonly hear people call Mount Chocorua, and that's just what I'm going to follow through with the rest of the episode. Even if you've never hiked Chocorua's trails or passed through Albany, New Hampshire, you probably caught a glimpse of it while you were cruising down the Kankamongus Highway in the fall, chasing that perfect foliage shot. You're probably thinking this must be some towering, snow-capped giant like Everest or Denali, right? But the mountains that big, they don't exist up here in the Northeast. But we all know at the end of the day that, size isn't everything, right? And Chocorua, the short king that it is, has a presence that outshines mountains that are twice its size. Because here's the kicker. Mount Chocorua doesn't even break the top 100 tallest mountains in New Hampshire. It sits at 3,490 feet. It doesn't even make the famed New Hampshire 4,000 footer list that you have everyone on their fucking dating sites being like, I'm a hiker and I hike the 4,000 footers. It doesn't even crack that list. In fact, it's not even the tallest mountain in the Sandwich Mountain Range. That title belongs to Mount Tri-Pyramid at 4,080 feet. So you might be thinking, okay, what's so special about this, right? Like, what is it? If it's not the size, what is it?
What makes it one of the most photographed mountains in the world?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. So if you haven't done it yet, I'm going to invite both of you and the gang right now, do yourself a favor and go to Google. And what I want you to do is I want you to search Mount Chocorua from Lake Chocorua. And if you're thinking, how the hell do I spell Chocorua? It is Chocoura. So Mount Chocorua from Lake Chocorua. And once you get that picture pulled up, what you're going to see is this beautiful mountain, its reflection in the water. You're going to see this dramatic peak bursting into the sky. And you're immediately going to understand the reason why this mountain has been painted, photographed, even minted onto the back of the 2013 America's Beautiful Quarter for New Hampshire. And the summit, if you ever go for the hike, what an absolute showstopper. You get a 360-degree view that stretches across the presidential range. You get to see the rolling foothills of New Hampshire and Maine, and you get to see miles and miles of wilderness. And it almost feels like you're getting kind of a glimpse into New Hampshire's past, into a past before humans come and humaned everything up. So I definitely recommend, if you haven't hiked it, get out there and do it.
Okay, now, yeah, looking at it, I've seen this picture a lot.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Beneath the beauty, there's something darker. There's a legend. And for some, the first thing that they'll tell you about Mount Chocorua isn't its breathtaking views or its pristine trails. It's a curse so feared the town of Burton literally changed its name to Albany to escape the curse's grip.
The town changed its name because of a curse.
It changed its fucking name. How nuts is that, right?
Like, how many people, I mean, it has to be, everybody in town agrees, has to be like...
Yep. Everyone's like, yep, this fucking curse is real.
Curse is real.
We are changing the name. Yeah. And why? Why would a town do that? Well, they did it because of failing crops, because of dying cattle, because of a streak of unexplained misfortunes that the locals were so convinced that the land had to be poisoned, that something had left a mark on this mountain and on this town, and it was something beyond their control.
It sounds like Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh my God.
A little bit, yeah.
So what you're saying is we need fireworks and we need to blast them into the sky.
Let's climb Chocorua. We're going to shoot rockets into the sky until the aliens come.
Yeah.
Let's go. So what's the real story? What's the truth behind the curse of Mount Chocorua? Well, to understand where this all started, we first need to take a quick dive into history. And that means learning about the local Abenaki tribes. We ready to do this?
Yes.
All right, let's get into it. The indigenous people who thrived in this region were part of an Algonquian-speaking peoples. But before we go any further, I want to clear up some important distinctions here. There is a specific indigenous nation known as the Algonquin people, who historically lived along the Ottawa River Valley in what is now Quebec and Ontario. But in this context, when we say Algonquian, we're talking about a language family, not a single tribe. So I'm really focusing on a linguistic kind of categorization. The Algonquian-speaking nations stretched from the northeastern United States all the way to the Rocky Mountains, from the Hudson Bay in North Canada all the way down to Virginia. And it was all connected by similar dialects of a shared language. In the Northeast, one of the major Algonquian-speaking groups was the Abenaki. The Abenaki primarily lived in Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and Quebec, and were made up of numerous tribes and alliances spread throughout the region. For the most part, the Abenaki were semi-nomadic, adapting to the seasons by hunting, fishing, and farming. They cultivated the classic indigenous trio known as the Three Sisters. Do y'all know what the Three Sisters are?
I do not.
Nope.
That's
all right. They were there basically three main things that they were cultivating and growing to help sustain and feed themselves. And the Three Sisters are corn, beans, and squash. And those three things together are what provided a sustainable and nutrient-rich diet for the Abenaki. Now, quick fun fact. If there are any hikers out there listening, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, I hiked Mount Chocorua and there were 3 sub-peaks called the Three Sisters.
Okay.
Pretty cool. Abenaki little tie-in right there. So on the eastern side of Mount Chocorua, you have North, Middle, and South Sister.
So I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
So they grew corn for the nutritional substance of it, but we have a hard time actually breaking down corn.
Digesting it?
Yeah, digesting it. So how did they actually consume the corn?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not going to say that they always did this, but they might have ate some of it like we eat corn here today. But they also were grinding it down into a flour and, making stuff out of the flour.
Tortillas.
Tortillas. Yeah.
Nice.
Maybe some tortillas, breads, corn mush. The Abenaki lived in wigwams and longhouses often built near rivers and lakes and were skilled at canoe making, basket weaving, and oral storytelling. Their spiritual beliefs were deeply tied to nature, shaping their worldview and interactions with both neighboring tribes and the European colonizers who would soon arrive. The Abenaki were skilled diplomats, favoring alliances and strategic peacekeeping over outright warfare when possible. But make no mistakes, they were also formidable warriors. When forced to fight, they waged brutal wars against neighboring tribes, most notably the Dutch-aligned Iroquois, who fought to control the fur trade, and the Abenaki also engaged in fierce battles and skirmishes against the European colonizers themselves. In fact, the Abenaki felt the European colonization before they even made their first contact with the Europeans. Any guesses on how that happened?
I want to say disease.
Yeah, that would be
We
my
brought
guess.
over disease and before they even...
Ding, ding, ding. It's estimated that in the late 1400s to early 1500s, when that Columbus fucker wasn't over here, well, there were 40 to 60,000 Abenaki people in New England. But by the 1800s, just 300 years later, that number had fallen to just a few thousand. A devastating loss caused not just by war, but more from the invisible enemies their immune system had no defense against.
Wow, you went from 40,000 to a few thousand. I mean, almost completely wiping out this culture.
Absolutely.
That's so sad.
It is. It was devastating. So even before the European settlements appeared on the East Coast, the Abenaki were, as we talked about, being decimated by measles, influenza, typhus, smallpox, and these were all spreading through trade networks, infected animals, refugees that were fleeing infected villages and coming for safety and help, and warfare with the tribes who had already actually been exposed to those diseases. Now, I want to try to be as accurate as I can when talking about the indigenous groups in New England because things, for me at least, got fuzzy and vague so fast because the truth is the tribes and alliances that lived here, they were fluid. They were adaptable. They're not always part of one unified identity. So to be clear, the term Abenaki doesn't actually refer to one single tribe. It's actually an umbrella term used to describe multiple sub-tribes and bands connected by language, culture, and shifting alliances. So if you really think about it, I've already said, well, hey, up in the Northeast and around, a lot of Eastern America, there was the Algonquian speaking categorization from a linguistic side. And then specifically in the Northeast under that categorization is the Abenaki, and making up the Abenaki are a number of individual tribes under that umbrella term. So you can see how it gets kind of confusing kind of quick.
Yeah, you don't want to be disrespectful, but you can't really sum all tribes up as one.
Exactly, exactly. So just to dive a little bit deeper here under some of these terms, historically, the Abenaki were divided into two major groups. We have the Western Abenaki, which are in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Quebec, and the Eastern Abenaki that are in Maine and New Brunswick. For the Western Abenaki, those are some of the stuff, because it's New Hampshire, that we're probably a little more familiar with around where we live. You've got the Pennacook, which we know we've got the city of Pennacook, the school district
River.
of Pennacook River. These tribes were along the Merrimack River Valley in New Hampshire, Massachusetts. There's the Cowasuk, which occupied the upper Connecticut River Valley in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Quebec. There's the Missisquoi, based in northwestern Vermont and parts of southern Quebec, and many, many other groups. I'm not going to name them all. For the Eastern Abenaki, as I said, that was Maine and New Brunswick area. And again, probably some tribes you've heard before. We got the Kennebec, which is based along the Kennebec River in central Maine. We've got the Pequawket, which lived on the western Maine and eastern New Hampshire near Fryeburg, Maine. And again, so many others that made up the areas. So as you can see, there's just a complex amount of different tribes that are living under each of these different categorizations.
It's interesting. So many of the local towns and rivers and school systems have been named after these different tribes. And I kind of knew it, but I don't think about it until you brought it up.
Yeah. We're going to dive a little deeper in a second. We're going to start talking about the Pennacook specifically and a confederacy that they made. So we're going to really dive deeper into some of the local towns, and you're going to see some really cool things, I think. At least I did. So a couple more facts here about the Abenaki. Unlike European-style governments, the Abenaki never had a single ruler or centralized government. Instead, they governed locally, with each tribe or band making decisions based on consensus, diplomacy, and necessity. And here's another important note. The Abenaki didn't use the term chief. So, which I thought was like really interesting because you hear that all the time, right? You're like,
yeah, that's an American word for it.
Yeah. Even this story, a lot of people say, oh yeah, the curse of Chief Chocorua, and it's like, well, that's not even like an indigenous word that they would use.
So interestingly enough, the chief was not actually in charge. They were just somebody who had a lot of wisdom that people from town went to. So they didn't actually make decisions. They were just kind of a sounding board.
Yeah, it was more of like a social, diplomatic, and consensus decision making amongst the tribes themselves.
So it was more like a community decision.
Yeah.
That sounds nice. I like that.
Yeah.
It does sound nice.
Can we trade in for that system?
No. We are stuck. Instead, because they didn't use the word chief, their leaders were known as sagamore, a local leader or war chief, often governed a single village or a band, or a sachem, a higher-ranking leader who oversaw multiple villages or confederacies. These titles varied by region, and some leaders were even spiritual figures, known as shamans or powwows, rather than political or war leaders.
That's where the name Sagamore Golf Course came from then. Okay.
And the Sagamore Bridge.
Yeah.
Or the Sagamore Bridge. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, though, that like the people came over and pretty much wiped out the indigenous people, stole their land, and then named...
I'm going to name all this
named everything after them. It's kind of, a little bit insulting, really.
Yeah, it's their sick version of justice.
Yeah, it's like, I'm going to justify what I did to you by naming this.
Don't worry,
after
we'll
you.
never
It's
forget
fine.
you.
It's kind of fucked up.
Ugh.
That's okay. The curse will get him back.
Nice way of bringing it back.
That's what I do.
One sagamore and one of the most famous Abenaki leaders was Passaconaway, and that was one of the mountains that I named in the Sandwich Range.
Yeah.
Passaconaway wasn't just a leader. He was a force, a man who unified and strengthened the Abenaki through both diplomatic finesse and deep spiritual influence. As the leader of the Pennacook tribe, he's credited with forming the Pennacook Confederacy, an alliance that brought together multiple tribes, including the Pennacook, the Winnipesaukee, the Ossipee, the Nashaway, and Sauhegan. Now, I just want to stop here real quick.
Well, this is like the UN.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, he's got this like little group of local tribes coming together. I work near Nashua. I've been to Nashua umpteen times. I had no idea that was a name based off of a local tribe that used to be around here.
I didn't either.
I had no idea either.
So cool. Now, this Pennacook Confederacy wasn't just for show. It was built out of necessity. It was created to resist attacks from the Iroquois that were coming from the west, while also navigating the growing presence of European settlers. Passaconaway played a crucial role in the survival of the Abenaki as they faced constant threats. And here's where things get wild. It's said that Passaconaway wasn't just a leader. He was a powerful shaman with supernatural abilities. Some claimed he could control the weather, make water burn, bring the dead back to life. So not exactly the kind of guy you want to fuck with.
Yeah, no. You got a different Bible Jesus vibe to him.
Yeah,
Gonna keep him on the good side.
Exactly. And first off, can I just say, like, how cool would it be to control the weather? God, that'd be
It'd
perfect.
always be 80 and sunny with a nice subtle breeze.
Oh, no. I feel like snow for every once in a while.
Yeah, rain and once in a blue dot. Like, nothing is
we
better.
need rain so things can grow and be healthy and green.
Mm-hmm. But is there anything better than like a nice rainy day where you're like, okay, I guess I'm not going outside today. I'm going to kick back, read a book, listen to the rain. Kathy's not in. Curious?
I just want to turn water into fire.
He's like, make the water burn.
I'll let it rain at night so things can grow.
All right. I'm losing this one.
You're not a shaman.
Yeah. But here's the thing. Despite being feared and revered as a mystical figure, Passaconaway chose diplomacy over war when dealing with the colonizers. He saw what was coming and believed resistance was futile. Instead, he worked to broker peace between his people and the English settlers, hoping that negotiation could secure Abenaki survival. After leading the Pennacook for decades, Passaconaway retired in 1660 at the age of 80, which, for that time period, is basically fucking immortal.
Yeah, 80 years old.
80 years old.
It's ancient.
Yeah.
It's that Paleolithic diet.
Yeah.
Took good care of himself.
He did.
10,000 steps a day.
Yeah, probably more. But even in retirement, the legends about him only grew stronger. And I love that I used the word retirement multiple times.
Yeah, he didn't retire.
Yeah, he's on the Sagamore Golf Course. Because apparently dying like a normal person was not in Passaconaway's style. Instead, it said that Passaconaway ascended into the sky on a sled pulled by wolves. Which, how the fuck do I get that exit? I want it.
Yeah, no, that's pretty badass.
That is so cool. That is so cool. I don't want to go that way. I'm gonna go to my girlfriend and be like, all right, in my will, take my body on a sled of wolves.
Pretty sure everything about that's going to be illegal.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out. Although Passaconaway was gone, he passed the Sagamore torch to his son, Wanalancet, who took over leadership of the Pennacook Confederacy. Wanalancet, he tried so desperately, he tried to follow in his father's footsteps, pushing for diplomacy over war, believing, just as Passaconaway did, that peace with the English was the only way their people could survive. But history had unfortunate other plans.
Yeah,
for
that didn't
the
work
people.
out.
It did not work out. In 1675, Metacom, who we actually talked about in your Bridgewater Triangle
Yes,
episode.
yep. King Philip's War.
You got it. Metacom, the Wampanoag leader, called on all Algonquian tribes to rise up in an all-out war against the English settlers. And this wasn't just another frontier skirmish. King Philip's War was full-blown scorched earth rebellion against the English. By the time it ended, nearly 10% of New England's population was dead, making it one of the bloodiest wars in American history. And I want you to think 10%, 1 in 10 people died.
Yeah, that is epic. That is crazy.
That is insane. It's absolutely insane. And when Metacom called for unity among all Algonquian-speaking tribes against the English, Wanalancet had a choice to make. Was it war or was it neutrality? And he chose neutrality. Wanalancet refused to join Metacom's rebellion, believing, as his father did, that the English were just too strong, the Abenaki could not win, and that peace was the only way forward if they wanted long-term survival. But, as we already mentioned, his faith in English diplomacy would be his greatest downfall. Despite their declared neutrality, the English attacked the Pennacook Confederacy anyway. In 1676, colonial militias burned down Pennacook villages, massacred men, women, and children. With their homes in ashes and their trust in the English shattered, the Pennacook were forced to act. But the problem was, they weren't unified in their response. Some of the Abenaki stayed behind to fight in scattered resistance efforts, but others fled north to Quebec, joining their already displaced brethren. This moment marked a turning point for the Abenaki history. Wanalancet would be the last Abenaki leader to push for peace with the English. From this point forward, diplomacy was dead. It would be warfare, resistance, and survival at all costs. By 1684, a new Sagamore stepped up to lead the Pennacook Confederacy, Kankomangas. Now, you all are probably familiar with Kankomangas. We at least got the highway.
Yeah, Kankomangas Highway.
Again, just like Passaconaway, just like Wanalancet, we have Kankomangas is another peak in the Sandwich Mountains. So Kankomangas was Wancelet's nephew or cousin. Got a little gray there. I couldn't figure out exactly what it was. And he took power when Wanalancet permanently retreated to Quebec. But by the time Kankomangas came to power, the Pennacook were a shadow of what they once were. They had been weakened by disease, colonial expansion, and war. As the English settlers kept pushing deeper into Abenaki lands, everyone was done negotiating. And in response to these mounting pressures, Kankomangas did what Wanalancet refused to do. He officially abandoned diplomacy and declared war on the English and joined the Wabanaki resistance. But by this point, this wasn't just about the Pennacook anymore. The Wabanaki resistance was part of a larger regional movement, a loose alliance of indigenous nations across the Northeast, all fighting back against the English expansion. So the Pennacook, once neutral, had been driven into the fight. The Wabanaki Confederacy had aligned with the French, who saw the Abenaki as a crucial military ally against the British. So they all fought alongside Wampanoag, the same people Wanalancet had refused to join in King Philip's War.
Man, if he had just made a different decision, we might be living in a very different country right now.
It makes you wonder, right?
Like that'd be enough to turn the tide to the point where we could have found a peace and had tribes and Westerners coexisting in this area.
Honestly, I don't trust it. Even if it did work out differently in that moment, we've seen how things played out.
I think there would have been more settlers that came over eventually, and
I would hope for a different outcome, but I guess we can't play the games of what ifs. We'll never know, right? With the backing of French weapons, supplies, and strategy, Kankomangas led multiple attacks on English settlements across New Hampshire and Massachusetts, particularly along the Merrimack and Piscataqua rivers. By 1689, he led one of the most infamous raids, the brutal attack on Dover, where his warriors killed settlers and took captives back to Quebec. And for the first time, they weren't just defending their lands, they were on the offensive. But despite his fierce resistance, Kankomangas and the Pennacook could not hold the line forever. By 1700, after mounting losses, even Kankamongus was forced to retreat north. The Pennacook Confederacy collapsed and the survivors dispersed. Many fled Canada, joining the other Abenaki communities. Others retreated just deeper north into Maine and northern New Hampshire, merging with some of the other Wabanaki groups. Some even assimilated into English settlements, forced to adapt to try to survive, and others lived in isolated bands, trying to keep their traditions alive in secret. Passaconaway's dream of a strong, independent Pennacook Confederacy had officially come to an end. The Abenaki fight against the English didn't stop with Kankamongus, though. Even after his retreat, the war between the Abenaki and the English raged on well into the 1700s, through Queen Anne's War and Dumnor's War and beyond. The Pennacook may have been scattered, but the Abenaki, they weren't going anywhere. Which brings us to the final Abenaki leader that we're going to be talking about today. Paugus. Paugus was a sagamore of the Pequawket band of Abenaki and continued the resistance during the early 1700s. Paugus was a respected and feared warrior whose name is believed to mean the oak. Paugus carried out and led many raids of the English in an attempt to fight back and strike fear as the English relentlessly pushed north. But these hit-and-run attacks wouldn't be enough. The war between the Abenaki and the English was about to reach its breaking point. On May 8th, 1725, a group of 34 English soldiers, led by Captain John Lovewell, set out to attack the Pequawat village near Fryeburg, Maine. Paugus, leading 80 to 100 Abenaki warriors against those 35 English soldiers, decided to meet them head on. This was no long-range skirmish. This was brutal, close-quarters combat. I'm talking gunfire, tomahawks, knives, everything just turned the battle into a chaotic bloodbath. And at the heart of the battle, a so-called legendary duel broke out between John Chamberlain and Paugus himself, the Abenaki leader. In the middle of the battle, it is said that Paugus and John Chamberlain found themselves reloading their muskets at the same time, face to face staring each other across the field. Both men raced to reload and fire first as chaos raged around them. They both picked up their rifles and aimed them at each other simultaneously at almost a perfect tie. But Chamberlain's shot struck first, killing Paugus before he could pull the trigger. With Paugus dead, the Pequawat warriors retreated. And this sounds kind of just like almost a perfect cinematic moment that's created, right?
Yeah, I think the victor writes the history, right?
Yeah.
I think that sounds a little bit more romanticized.
Exactly. Because it got me thinking too, like, is this real? And when I started kind of unpacking it, there's no Abenaki account of this duel ever happening. So to your point, Chris, this was likely a romanticized colonist tale, the kind that settlers fell in love with. Considering the intensity of the close-range warfare, the idea of two men calmly just like staring at each other, slowly reloading their weapons in this Western duel seems kind of unlikely, right? It's like they're like, hey man, what's up? How you doing over there? Yeah, just give me a minute right here doing that. And there's people with hatchets just like going on beside them.
You're reloading your weapon. I'm just going to come shank you, Sean.
Yeah, right? So seems unlikely, but hey, who knows, right? What isn't disputed is that Paugus was killed, and his death marked the beginning of the end for the Abenaki dominance in Maine and New Hampshire. With mounting losses and English expansion showing no signs of slowing, the Abenaki were again forced from their lands and forced to retreat further north. Some warriors again would choose to fight to the end and regroup and fight alongside their French allies. These warriors would continue to resist expansionism all the way through the end and all the way through the French and Indian War of 1754 to 1763. But this war too would end in disaster for the Abenaki and the French. When the French lost to Britain in 1763, the Abenaki lost their strongest European ally, and that left them with nowhere to return. So the remaining Abenaki in New England really had two choices: stay and acclimate, hiding their identities, blending into English society and hoping to survive unnoticed, or join the larger pockets of the Abenaki who remained in Quebec. Despite pressure still coming down from both British and French, that pocket survived. And today their descendants still carry on the Abenaki name, a people who refused to be erased. So that was a quick and dirty history of some of the great sagamores whose names are now carried by some of the peaks that dot the Sandwich Mountain Range. But after hearing this quick Abenaki history, you may be wondering, what the fuck, Sean? I still haven't heard about Chocorua. What the hell are you dragging me through? Why are we doing this? This makes no sense.
I want to hear about the curse.
Where's the curse, fucker? And to that, I'd say, yeah, you're right. I should be talking about curses here. But I do want to call out, it's strange, right? We heard about Passaconaway. We heard about Kankamongus. We heard about Paugus. We heard about Wanalancet. All the other Abenaki peaks in the Sandwich Mountain Range, we just heard a little bit of history about. What we didn't hear was Chocorua.
Mm-hmm.
Where is he in this Abenaki history? Let's walk through what lore and history have to say about Chocorua. And fair warning, things are about to get weird. The story of Chocorua, the man, is one of friendship, betrayal, grief, and vengeance. And like any good legend, there's no single official version. What we do know is that Chocorua was supposedly a Pequawket Abenaki, and his story picks up after the Battle of Pequawet at 1725 and the death of Paugus. So now you can see why I did all this. This is where the story is going to pick up. Most of the remaining Abenaki fled north to Quebec, but Chocorua, he chose that different path. Chocorua had already lost too much to leave. His wife had died from disease, leaving him alone to raise his young son. So instead of joining his displaced people, he stayed behind, living apart from what remained of his tribe, yet still among the English settlers. And despite the rising tensions between settlers and the Abenaki, Chocorua is said to have befriended a Scottish settler named Cornelius Campbell. And isn't that the whitest fucking name you've ever heard?
Yeah,
It makes,
Cornelius.
it makes me think of like corned beef and cabbage. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that corned beef and cabbage.
That's what it makes me think of.
Cornelius Campbell, one of the many colonists pushing into what was then called Burton, but is now Albany, New Hampshire. Two men, one native to the land and one newcomer, finding some kind of mutual respect for each other. Beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Or so it seemed. Chocorua trusted Campbell. Trusted him enough at least to leave his son in Campbell's family's care while he was away on tribal business. But while Chocorua was gone, his son accidentally ingested poison, a lethal mixture Campbell had prepared to kill wolves and foxes that preyed on his livestock. Some versions of this legend claim that Chocorua returned to find his son already dead. Others say his son died later after returning home from Campbell's care. Either way, the result was the same. Chocorua's son was dead. And whatever friendship that had once existed between the two men was gone in an instant. To Chocorua, the white man had already taken too much. His wife, his people, his land, and now his only son. His grief twisted into rage, and revenge soon followed. One day, while Campbell was away, Chocorua took his hatchet and murdered Campbell's wife and children. When Campbell returned, he was left to endure the same pain Chocorua had suffered. His family was gone, and Campbell knew exactly who was responsible. So what Campbell do? He grabbed his musket and he decided to chase down Chocorua, and the chase went into the mountains. Higher and higher the chase led until finally Chocorua stood alone at the rocky summit. There was nowhere left to run. As Campbell approached, some versions of the legend say he demanded Chocorua jump, but Chocorua refused. The Great Spirit gave Chocorua his life, and he will not throw it away at the bidding of the white man. And then, knowing his end was near, Chocorua lifted his arms to the sky and shouted a curse upon the settlers. A curse upon ye, white man. May the Great Spirit curse ye when he speaks in the clouds, and his words are fire. Chocorua had a son, and ye killed him while the sky looked bright. Lightning blast your crops. Wind and fire destroy your dwellings. The evil spirit breathe death upon your cattle. Your graves lie in the warpath of the Indian. Panthers howl, and wolves fatten over your bones. Chocorua goes to the Great Spirit, but his curse stays with the white men. After Chocorua finished his curse, in some versions, Campbell fired his musket and the shot sent Chocorua tumbling down the cliffs below. In others, Chocorua was already shot, but with his last breath, he cursed the settlers and then leapt to his own death, deciding to take his life into his own hands. In another telling, he simply stood at the summit, shouted his curse, and then just jumped on his own. But in the most common version, Chocorua was shot and fell from the cliffs, leaving behind a curse that would haunt the land forever. I think we all need to take some notes that if you ever do try to curse someone, like make it badass
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
That
I mean,
was a great curse.
That's a
If I
great
ever
curse.
get stuck up in Manchester and if somebody's got a gun to me, I hope I can come up with a curse that badass.
Yeah. Oh my God, please do and record it.
Yes.
I was like, yeah, never mind. I'm not going to rob you anymore.
Yeah, I'll crazy them. Yeah.
Just throw your hands up. Start, I curse your corner.
Oh man. After Chocorua screamed his final curse, the town of Burton, now Albany, New Hampshire, supposedly went to hell. People started experiencing some weird shit. The trees around the peak of Mount Chocorua torn up by violent winds and were hurled at settlers' homes, which according to legend is why the peak is so bare and rocky today.
Oh, that was in the curse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The town's crops blasted by storms and left unable to grow. The cattle dropped left and right, and every time they tried to bring in new cattle, same thing, they just die. So what does history have to say about this curse? Well, first off, I wish I could tell you that there was some documented case of settlers dodging wind-propelled tree trunks in like an early version of Final Destination or something. But unfortunately, there's zero historical record of that actually happening, which is hugely disappointing. How cool would that be, right? Just hurricane force wind, boom, tree on this house, tree on this house. That'd be sick, right?
I mean, that could have happened. There could have been a hurricane.
Could have been, but I don't think there was, just the spirits grabbing trees and chucking shit, unfortunately. But to the gang, if you have historical proof of this happening, please send us an email at thegang@weirdafterdark.com because we need to see this shit. But
your mom might have been there, so you can ask
and more likely it was your mom.
Oh, shit. Well, jokes aside, if you're looking for something actually weird, well, guess what? The stuff about the crops dying and the cattle dying, that actually happened. There's a moment here that things get interesting because legend and history actually do start to overlap, and there's some truth behind all of this. So let's dig in. The cattle around the base of Mount Chocorua did regularly get sick and die, and the townspeople fully believed it was because the curse of Chocorua. In fact, the disease that kept wiping out all their livestock became so infamous that it was literally named Burton's Ale. And guess what? The people of Burton were so freaked out, they actually thought that changing the town's name would break the curse. So in an unofficial vote, Burton became Albany. And did it fix things?
Of course it worked.
Did it?
Yeah, of course not. Of course it didn't fucking work. like you just get the name stuff and bad things stop happening? Like, come on. Even 20 years after the name change, settlers were still documenting cattle deaths. But sadly, prepare yourself because science is going to ruin our fun. The cattle deaths weren't caused by Chocorua's ghost poisoning the livestock. Many sources actually attribute that the drinking water had dangerously high levels of calcium chloride, which slowly poisoned them over time.
Well, that might be what caused it. But did his curse cause the poison in the water?
I don't know. I think more likely if it was a slow death of the cattle, it probably just took some time for those, calcium chloride to build
Sean,
up.
I don't like your attitude.
I know. I'm a fun runner. I know.
Just saying.
Okay, well, if it wasn't the curse on the cattle, what about the curse in the crops? Maybe some truth to that, dying. Right? Well, again, I don't think it was a curse. I just think, unfortunately, Burton had some pretty shitty farming conditions. Albany and Burton's soil was rocky, thin, and nutrient poor, which meant that when early crops were planted, they likely depleted what little nutrients were already there. Meanwhile, just one town over, the soil was richer, dense, and way better for growing crops, and they had no problem at all. So when it comes to the crops, I think it was just bad location, bad soil, bad luck, nothing supernatural, just early New Englanders trying to figure out sustainable farming and failing. Yeah. So final verdict here on the curse. Was Chocorua's curse real? Sadly, probably not. Did settlers believe it was? Absolutely.
They did.
They changed their name of the town over it.
They fucking did. And that is hilarious. And that is some good content. But what about the man, right? We talked about the curse. What about the man Chocorua? What does historical records have to say about him? Well, nothing. If Chocorua was truly a sagamore or a leader, we'd expect to see some kind of record, either from English sources or within the Abenaki oral tradition. When I search for Passaconaway, Wanalancet, Kankamongus, or Paugus, I find tons of context, tons of historical references, tons of documented conflicts in oral history. When you search Chocorua, you find this curse, and that's pretty much it, nothing else. It's like he never existed outside of this legend.
Why did they name a mountaintop over him?
Ooh, we're going to get into that. Give me one second here. Which, to be fair, we can't say for 1,000% confirm or deny whether he did or didn't exist, because let's spin it. Maybe he did exist, but he just wasn't a sagamore leader. Maybe he was just an ordinary Abenaki warrior, hunter, or villager whose story grew into legend over time. And maybe the chief part, the sagamore part, maybe that just got added to try to add some weight around to the curse, right? We know how stories work.
Sure.
Yeah, it's like phone tag. They evolve over time, right? All we can say for sure is any paper trail about a native named Chocorua is very, very minimal. So if he didn't exist, where did the story start? And to your question, Chris, where did the name Chocorua come from? Well, when I researched that, the first known map marking of the mountain appears in 1784 in historian Jeremy Belknap's journal of a tour of the White Mountains. But when you look at the mountain, it wasn't called Chocorua. It was labeled Mount Chocorua. Now, Chocorua in Abenaki means serpent that guards the mountain springs. And fun fact, doing some research, there are some snakes that are in the watershed of that particular area. So serpent, that mountain springs kind of makes sense, right?
Eels.
Yeah. Then in 1791, the name Chocorua first appears on a map. Now, what you're thinking here is they literally just add Cho to Korua. That's literally what they did to get Chocorua. Now, Cho in Abenaki means heavily eroded rocks. So put together, likely meant something along the lines of rocky home of the water serpent. Which starts to kind of make sense. So the mountain's name itself isn't necessarily tied to a specific person, but rather to the description of the land, which makes sense given the Abenaki's deep spiritual connection to nature. As far as the earliest records of the Chocorua legend itself, they don't actually appear until the 1820s, almost 100 years after Chocorua supposedly died. In 1828, Thomas Cole, one of America's most famous landscape painters, documented the tale during his tour of the White Mountains in his journal. And in his journal, he wrote, "We came out at length to a lonely and deserted clearing just at the foot of the mountain. The cause of this abandonment, they say, the poisonous effects of the water upon the cattle, the result, according to tradition, of the curse of Chocorua, an Indian from whom the peak upon which he was killed by the whites takes its name." After hearing this story for the first time, Thomas Cole created an original painting of Mount Chocorua. And fun fact, that painting actually sold this year on January 23rd, 2025. Any guess as to how much an original painting by Thomas Cole that was done in 1828 sold for?
60 grand.
60 G's?
I have no idea.
Well, somewhere between I have no idea and 60 G's is correct. It is $1.6 million is what I sold.
I was closer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So very, very, very pricey. The following year, after Thomas Cole's painting and first documented mention of the curse in 1829, Lydia Marie Child popularized the legend by publishing her version in The Token, a Christmas and New Year's present, which, what a name of your book. A Christmas
That's great
present.
advertising.
Yeah,
This is a Christmas present.
It's a gift. And from there, the legend was officially locked into New England folklore. So what do we make of the curse of Mount Chocorua? A made-up evolving legend? A true story that's just lost to time? Its details twisted, exaggerated, and retold over 300 years? I guess for that, I'll leave it up to you. And that is my story on the curse of Mount Chocorua.
Yeah, we don't even know if this grew out of legend and story and changed over time. And
Yeah,
you don't even know if he's real.
yeah.
I almost feel like it kind of mirrors the standoff in that war with Paugus, right? Like,
With Chamberlain.
yeah, where it was like romanticized and turned into something that it wasn't to tell a story, mirror and echo the beliefs of the victors. I kind of wonder if this legend or tale is kind of a mashup of the history of the natives and the colonists coming in to tell a story to represent a short version of complexity of the relationship between the two of them.
I know the Native Americans did not have a written language, so they weren't recording anything other than in oral history.
Exactly.
And we wrote shit down and we got it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Such a cool story. I definitely had to go a little deeper into like the Abenaki history than I thought. When I originally started doing this story, I was like, okay, this is gonna be a 15-minute. It's gonna be a shorty. I got in a new job. This is exactly what I need. And next thing I knew, I was knee deep in Abenaki history. Like, where am I? But I hope I didn't lose the listeners or Kathy, Chris, or you two into it, because I thought it was A, cool. B, like I've never really taken the time to try to understand the local indigenous history itself.
Mm-hmm.
But B, I learned so much, and I think it was so necessary because that history allowed me to tie context to the Sandwich Mountain Range and the indigenous names that were there, and got to separate truth from fiction and the true peaks in their history to Chocorua and how that ultimately got there. And I don't want to say that it's fake, but what is the real legend behind that? And I thought that allowed to tell a really cool story. So
Yeah.
No, it was a really interesting story. I love history, and so much of what I understood, I had it wrong.
yeah, same. I didn't even know Nashua was based off of native tribes.
Yeah.
And I fucking basically live there.
I had no idea that like any of the peaks were named after people or things from history. So that was very cool.
Well, I hope you two enjoyed the story, and gang, I hope you did as well. If you did, feel free to go ahead and visit our Instagram at Weirder After Dark, and I'll be sure to go ahead and post some supporting documentation there from my research. We also want to send out a quick reminder that we are currently building some communities. So if you are enjoying these episodes and you want to learn more or connect closer with us, feel free to visit one of those, and you can find them at either Facebook, Reddit, or over at Instagram just by searching at Weirder After Dark. Hop in there and talk to us other people who are enjoying these episodes just like you are. And don't forget, we are always on the lookout and on the hunt for your stories. Something strange happened to you? Something weird happened to you? You have strange nightmares? Paranormal? Do aliens abduct you? We're open to it. Send your stories to us, and you can do it by emailing us at thegang@weirderafterdark.com. And remember, if you're liking this shit and if you're loving with this shit, the best thing that you can do for us is to share this shit with someone that you love. Don't forget, it always gets a little weirder after dark.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.